Ism's good, pal.
Third time's a charm.
Oh, my God. There's nothing worse than freaking carving out the time and then coming into the studio and then there just be like technical difficulties out the wazoo. And I swear, man, it seems to revolve around the times when we are talking about something spooky or talking about our own experiences or, in this case, today, listener experiences.
Yeah, specifically our listener experiences because, I don't know, is there like a tulpa element to this? Is there like, does it like these gremlins in the machines, does it like sort of like activate that or something? I don't know. It's weird, but it happens every time. Speaking of gremlins, did you know that... Howdy, folks, and welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, pal. How we doing?
Man.
Hey, man. Speaking of gremlins, do you know where that term originally came from?
Japan.
No, but American pilots, like early days of American pilots.
Oh, yeah.
Remember this? They came up with the term gremlins when they were having like sort of technical, like equipment failure, that kind of stuff. They would always say like, oh, there's like gremlins, pretty much how we use it now. But I've always thought that was cool.
That is pretty cool, man.
So thankfully to you listeners, you've really picked up on like sending in your stories, sending us emails of like your own sort of paranormal situations, and all that good stuff. Some voice memos, some written. We love them all, and we really do appreciate you guys like kind of kicking it up a notch. And more and more are coming in. Usually we would split them, kind of split them up, and I don't know, use them sort of a little more sparingly to kind of spread them out. But since a lot more are kind of coming in, we're going to feature a good bit of those today.
Yeah, it was kind of like a situation where, like now, listeners, we generally have a plan of what we want to cover, what the episode's going to be about and all that. But sometimes when you guys send us certain things that are so interesting, your own personal accounts, it's just almost impossible for us to ignore because we go down these rabbit trails and find out all this other stuff kind of close to what you're talking about, or some of it kind of even sounds sometimes like things that we've experienced. So without further ado, man, let's dive into some of these that we've gotten recently.
Yeah, let's do it.
This first one comes from longtime listener Clay, who sent us this email. He says, Tyler and Woody, great podcast. Been thinking a lot about what is and what isn't real lately. Maybe it's because I'm cycling through a lot of Philip K. Dick books. I have always been fascinated by a story he told. Maybe it's apocryphal, maybe not, about a book that he was looking for in a dream. He swears that there was a short story or a book titled The Empire Never Ended, which he folded into his own experiences. Phil Dick believed that he himself was experiencing the persecution of early Christians in the Roman Empire after the death of Christ, and that the current 1960s and 1970s America he was living in was a hologram overlaid onto that early Christian society. Hence, I guess, the empire never ended.
Wow.
And before we go into the next piece, for those of you that don't know who Philip K. Dick is, he's a sci-fi writer that wrote, let's just talk about the ones that have turned into movies that we all know and love. Blade Runner, Total Recall, Screamers, Minority Report, Paycheck. I don't know if I would include that in those that I love, but it is an interesting concept. A Scanner Darkly,
Man in the High Castle.
The Adjustment Bureau, The Man in High Castle, which is like a show.
Yeah.
So anyway, prolific sci-fi writer. And it's interesting that he kind of had that perception of his life being like a hologram overlaid, which is, that's interesting, man. That almost sounds like I wouldn't want that tortured mindset, because that would be torturous, I think.
Well, what's interesting about it is I don't know that if you even know this. So there's sort of this theory that, and this goes along with like the Mandela effect, where in 2012 or 2012 rather, something changed, be it the turning on of like the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, or like the Mayan calendar stuff. So yeah, many believe that in 2012 or 2012 rather, that the world kind of reset, and that's sort of plays into the Mandela effect and all that stuff. And a good bit of people believe that it has something to do with them, turning on the Large Hadron Collider after like this new sort of build over there with CERN, or sort of this new age kind of I don't know. There was a lot of stuff in 2012. We're passing by like certain planets or whatever. There's like a whole host of things, but a lot of people believe that we're sort of living outside of the dimension we're sort of like supposed to be on, right? And
yeah,
I don't know. I feel like maybe Philip K. Dick was kind of alluding to something similar, in saying that he believed that it was almost like it was like overlaid the Roman Empire, which, by the way, I think him and Orwell, I really do believe that these guys are, in a way, like prophets,
Yeah. For those of you that don't recall, like the craze around the Mayan calendar and stuff, to give you a little bit more context there, it was like, I think December 21st, 2012 was when their calendar sort of ended and then would reset.
Yep.
Yeah. And so tons and tons of people, well, first, of course, had some anxiety revolving around that. I myself was one of them. My son was just like a couple months old, and I'm like, okay, cool. Hey, man. Hey, universe. Cool.
Great time.
Like, I've got a 3-month-old kid. Can we just wait a couple, years? For goodness sakes. But anyway, at the time, I remember December 22nd, 2012, being like, here we go. All right. It's not like I stayed up all night or anything like that. I was just, in the back of my mind, my therapist said it wasn't, quote, healthy to focus on that. So through a lot of, coping skills, I was able to get past it. But what I'm saying is, it is an interesting concept, thinking about that being sort of the, I don't know if you would call it the nexus point. I don't know if that's the right terminology. Is it? Anyway, that being like the moment that potentially there's like a split. And
like
so there is
a merge
to, well, I'm thinking a split, because there are those of us that were alive and old enough to remember things pre-December 21st, 2012, that are different than the people that are alive and old enough post-2012. They remember things differently. And so I have seen how that is, I'll say like an argument that I find very interesting whenever, in relation to the Mandela effect. Because most of the time, if you go back and you listen to that episode, I'll say this then, but I'll say it again here. Dude, I grew up overseas where everything was like pirated anyway. And so there's a fair chance that whenever I was looking at the Berenstain Bears books, it probably just said Bob's Bears or something, like...
Yeah.
So like my memory on things like that is just terrible. So, all right, the email continues. He says, I like how he does it too. He's like, closes out that statement about Philip K. Dick. And then, anyway, here's another weird dream I had last night.
Which, by the way, for all you new listeners, Clay is our good buddy. And so this may seem a little more like conversational because, we're kind of constantly talking with Clay. So, Clay, we appreciate you.
That's a great point. That's another thing that we need to kind of mention here, which is part of the thing that we love about our show really is just this community that's building around it. And we feel like we can have these conversations with folks.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like bounce ideas off of one another and stuff like that. And so that's what we love. All right. Clay's story goes like this. This is about, Clay's dream went like this. I was at the beach and a storm was rolling into shore. The black clouds were bubbling and bulging, kind of like a carbuncle coming to a head. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a flying saucer emerge from the clouds. I fished out my phone and began filming, but noticed my battery had drained to 9%. I told my friend Rick to start filming. Rick is an amateur photographer and always had the best cameras, which he did. 9 flying saucers landed and beings began exiting the holes. They were diminutive and had all of the markings of alien grays. I approached one and noticed it was wearing coveralls painted white and had a canvas sack, also painted white, tied up around its head. The eyes were misshapen and asymmetrical, almost childlike drawings. The mouth was a weird construction paper grin. I removed the sack and saw just a regular kid underneath. When I asked him what he was doing, he said, "I am collecting the other hybrids." Clay finishes the email with, "Weird. No more late night pizza before bed. Keep up the great work, Clay."
Yeah, that's awesome. There's something really creepy about that idea of like these I don't know, sort of aliens exiting these like crafts that look legit, and then when the alien comes out, it, you know, has like a drawn on, like crudely drawn faces. I know it's not exactly this, but it does kind of remind me of the cover to Passport to Magonia, where you know, it's like these multiple things that are beings, if you will, you know, sort of taking off their different masks and stuff.
I mean, to be honest with you too, just the idea of an alien gray wearing coveralls somehow makes it scary too.
Yeah, right.
Or like the idea of it, I mean, in a somewhat humorous way too, it reminds me of our buddy Brad's D&D character and the crummy disguises that he has. But it's like, imagine an alien gray doing its best to kind of trick you into thinking it was normal, you know, but just not doing great at it. That, for some reason, it's just freaky to me. Well, sort of like the Woman in Black situation, or in that book by Trey.
Oh, like the Meadow Project?
Yeah, the Meadow Project. Trey Hudson?
Hudson, that's it. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, where they have like the fawn, you know, click, 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 you know, and you're like, oh, those aren't high heels. They actually have deer hooves for feet.
Yeah, yeah. It's that like Phantom Stranger or the, you know, showing up to dinner. To me, though, I mean, honestly, it's weird because it almost feels like, and I don't even know if we really talked about screen memories on the show.
I mean, briefly, I think we mentioned them.
You see it a lot in like Whitley Strieber's Communion and what's the guy's name? Michael Cleveland, I think, or Cleland, where, you know, they'll go through like a large portion of time in their lives where they're seeing like a ton of like owls or deer, like, you know, like you were saying, fawn and stuff. And then, you know, something will kind of happen and they'll realize like, oh, wait a minute, like that's like something's off. Like, well, it looks like an owl, but it's as big as like a car. And then, you know, they'll have like a hypnotic regression, and it's just almost like, you know, using the term overlay again, but it's like a way of whatever these beings are, like sort of overlaying or sort of camouflaging themselves in your mind. But whenever you have like the regression, it's like you see them as they really are, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and terrifying. So
terrifying.
Something about screen memories that's interesting. So it was actually coined by Sigmund Freud, and it's sort of your psychological defense mechanism, right? That is essentially replacing something, you know, maybe traumatic or whatever from your childhood, maybe something even just distressing, and it sort of replaces it with something less bad, I guess, it disguises that. And so in a way, it kind of builds this sort of artificial, I don't know, gap in that memory to protect yourself. Yeah. And so I guess the guys that you were mentioning sort of, they might have been the first ones to sort of apply it to the paranormal or the ufology stuff, which makes sense though. You know, but I think the super interesting thing is that those folks tend to have the same screen memory, right? Before all
Right.
that stuff was documented
Yep.
and,
Exactly.
you know, pre-internet, when somebody can just be like, hey, man, I don't know, I saw an owl too, you know?
Well, the interesting thing too is, and this is a topic that we kind of have talked about a good bit, where, you know, there is something going on, and like, you know, maybe Freud was right in saying that, like, it's like it's like a construct that your own mind is sort of projecting, you know, so that you can kind of like make sense of it, or it's something that these beings are doing. You know, it's like I'm kind of on the fence. I go back and forth on what I believe that is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the one thing that's interesting about Freud's idea is something like the Ariel School event, where, you know, obviously all these kids, I mean, it was this massive group of kids, like 80 kids or something, maybe even more. And, you know, this craft like lands out just outside of the playground. They were all kind of outside. They all saw the exact same thing. But then what was interesting is, I said I thought it was interesting, is when they go to describe like the, you know, quote unquote, like aliens or whatever these beings are, it's like there's so many of them had completely different things. And one of the really interesting things is the kids, like, it was like an international school, kind of like what you went to. And so you had these kids coming from all these different backgrounds, and, you know, that are sort of bringing their own like life experiences. And so to them, they're like, oh, well, I've always thought an alien looked like this. And these are the this is the folklore and the folk tales that I grew up with. So it's like that's what they saw, which is pretty fascinating. But yeah, I do think I don't know, maybe I think Freud was probably right on that, but I also think that there is something with these sort of alien greys and that era of like alien abductions, because like owls and deer, that's like a super common thing, like you were saying, Woody.
Well, another thing too, like, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that a higher intelligence being potentially has the know-how or the technological ability to be able to manipulate the electrical signals in the brain, which would then sort of create these sort of screen memories. Now, how they go about inserting specific image, I'm not sure, but it kind of reminds me of things like Clockwork Orange, or even 1984, or anytime there's any sort of brainwashing, 12 Monkeys, whatever it is.
Like MK Ultra type stuff.
Right. In a way, it kind of reminds me of that.
Probably much more advanced, though, you know.
Now, thank you again, Clay, for sending that stuff over, man. Super interesting and thought-provoking stuff here. When we get back from this break, we're actually going to hear verbatim from one of our listeners, Dan from California, who sent us in a collection of his own experiences, and you're going to hear from him directly, his own voice. So when we get back, let's dive right in.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire. You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you?
Is anyone out there?
We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler, and you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show.
Hey, Woody and Tyler. Thanks so much for putting this show on. That Would Be Rad. I'm an avid listener. My name's Dan. I'm from California. And I'm going to share a few experiences I had during the time I lived in the Bay Area. So, I was born and raised in the same town, suburbs of the Bay Area. between Napa and Sacramento and San Francisco. And this city was and is it's a suburb, but on the outskirts of the city, towards the east side, it turns into low rolling hills and a couple of things that are borderline mountains. Not quite, but really big hills. And out in that area, there are actually like farmsteads, just a few, maybe like 7. And it can get, there's mountain lions and bears out there and stuff. But they're rare enough that it's like it makes big news, local news, if they show up in town, especially like mountain lions and stuff. So during my 8th grade year, we move across town. And at this point, my dad was formerly an electrician and got offered a full-time pastoral job at our church some years before, but right around the time I was in middle school. Later, in 8th grade, we moved from the first house and the only house I had ever lived in up until that point to our second house, my parents' second house. And I had shared a bedroom and a bunk bed with my 2 other brothers until this point, and now we moved from a 1-story house to the other side of town, the east side, where it gets, kind of hilly and slightly rural. And for the first time in my life, I had my own bedroom without having to share a bunk bed, and my sister had her own bedroom, and my 2 younger brothers had to still share the bunk bed in their room. And I was so thrilled until a bunch of weird stuff started happening. So, in 8th grade, somewhere in 8th grade, I, like most people, will sporadically wake up at 3 a.m. every night for no reason and kind of look at the clock. And so one of these nights I wake up, it's 3 a.m., look at the clock, and I'm like, great, I'm going to wake up feeling miserable and groggy because, my sleep's been interrupted for no reason. And so all of our bedrooms in this house are up a single flight of stairs on the second floor. There's only one set of stairs to get upstairs. Then there's like a stretch of hallway, and then, 2 rooms on one side, 2 rooms on the other. My room was facing the street, so the front of the house, above the garage. So there's like a little bit of roof underneath my window. And the way I had my room set up at the time was I slept underneath the window, and I had curtains and blinds, and the blinds always remain closed for the most part at night, or always remain closed at night, yeah. But the curtains, sometimes I would leave them open. I don't know why. I probably didn't get a lot of good sleep when I was a teenager. But I wake up, it's 3 a.m., I sit up, I look at my clock, I'm pissed off, and as soon as I start to feel pissed off about waking up early in the morning, this beam shines through my window, through the blinds, and is like pegged on me square on the chest. And I look down, and by the time I think, oh my gosh, there's a sniper rifle beam on me, I hear a gun blast. And then I wake up. And I'm in essentially the same position, but I'm not actually sitting up in bed. And I guess it was a night terror, except for that my room and the light in my room from the night, nighttime light from the moon and stuff outside and everything is still exactly the same. But I guess it was just a night terror.
Wow.
Yeah, so when this story started, Dan, well, first, again, thank you so much for sending all these.
Yeah.
They're really, really intriguing. Each one is going to be unique, and I can't wait for our listeners to hear them. But this first one, it kind of reminds me of, not a whole lot in terms of supernatural. Well, I say that, and I don't know, maybe supernatural things have happened to me, maybe they haven't. But the things that I can relate to with that story, and I think all of us can, are those moments like in the middle of the night when you swear there was a noise that was loud enough to wake you up, Mm-hmm. I mean, in the dream, it seems like a bomb just went off in your bedroom and you wake up and you're like, everything's still and quiet. And for whatever reason, man, that is one of those scariest moments to me in the middle of the night. My heart's racing. My adrenaline is just going full blast. I'm ready to attack. I'm battle ready.
Yeah, and that's actually, this is different than what Dan was describing, but that's actually called, there's a medical term, it's called exploding head syndrome.
Really?
Which sounds really intense, but it's basically that. As you're falling asleep, it's like this huge, loud bang.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't think they really know like the reason for that, or...
I think it's just general anxiety. Okay.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about Dan's dream is originally I'm thinking, well, Clay's story and then some of the stuff that Dan sent in, you know, it's sort of a mixed bag. But to be honest, like I don't know, there could be an element of that screen memory type thing happening, you know,
good call, yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because initially I thought this was going to be a story about like an alien ship outside of his room or something. Hey, man, maybe it was.
Maybe it was, exactly.
Whoa. All right, let's jump into the next one.
So that was the first weird one. Not supernatural by any means, but it gets weirder. So same room, it's a couple years later, and I wake up in the middle of the night again, probably 3 a.m. And right after I woke up, I could hear a sound outside. It sounded like a guy screaming, kind of, or yelling. And the tone of the voice was kind of like indignant, angry, pissed off yelling. And we lived at this house that we had moved into a few years prior was at the end of what was originally a cul-de-sac, and the small part of the L shape of the street actually went uphill, and then we were in the center of the cul-de-sac. So if you were driving uphill, your car is pointing right at our driveway. And then above that, the garage and my window. And so anytime anyone would drive up that hill, my window would light up with, you know, their nighttime lights, their high beams are on or whatever. So it sounds like somebody is driving. It sounds like the speed that this person is moving. It sounds like they are indignantly yelling at someone who's not responding, and they are in a car that's driving, you know, kind of quickly up the cul-de-sac. That's what it sounds like, because the sound isn't stationary. The sound is moving. This person yelling or whatever, that they're moving. But as I'm listening, the sound is getting closer and louder and closer, and I'm thinking to myself at this point, like, I should be able to make out what they're saying now, the words they're actually saying. This sound is too loud and it sounds like a person. It doesn't sound like an animal. It sounds like a person. And so I am kind of freaking out now, and the sound is louder and louder until my window starts actually vibrating. And you got to understand, like, where I lived, it wasn't uncommon for people to, you know, load the back of their car with subwoofers and to blast those at, you know, all ungodly hours of the night and wake me up, and my windows would be actually rattling and vibrating. So I know what that sounds and feels like, but this was definitely a person or a thing that was male that was yelling outside the top of their lungs at my window. It's taken maybe a minute or less for this to all take place, and then it just stops. Complete silence. And I'm freaking out, drenched in cold sweat. I jump out of bed, rip my door open, go to my parents' room, knock on the door, kind of push the door open, and start yelling like, "Mom and Dad, did you hear that noise? What's going on? You know, what's happening? Why is nobody awake?" They're both sound asleep. And they're like the lightest sleepers in the world. Didn't hear anything. They're super pissed off that I woke them up. And so I begrudgingly go back to bed, and I guess I fell asleep and got some sleep. And in the morning, I asked my siblings, like, "Hey, did you guys hear something on the roof last night?" And they're like, "No, what are you talking about?" Like, looking at me like I'm insane and crazy. it wasn't until this year, that was like 17 plus years ago, it wasn't until this year that I heard that same sound on your podcast when you guys played the recording of the samurai chatter. And for the first time, I was able to go, oh my gosh, that's the sound I heard. That's what it was. And apparently it's usually associated with Bigfoot sightings, except for I lived in a rural area, or in a suburb that was on the outskirts of a rural area, and I didn't see a Bigfoot, but I definitely heard what sounded like an angry samurai ape yelling at the top of their lungs outside my window.
There's two of them across the creek at the big rocks.
I'm not going to lie, Dan. Whenever I got to the point in your story where, so I was listening to these stories as I was walking early in the morning, in the wee hours of the morning. The sun wasn't even up yet, and so they were already kind of, putting me on edge a little bit. But when I got to the part of your story where you're like, and then I hadn't heard about it until your show, and you and the samurai chatter, and of course, if you're unfamiliar with that, everyone else that's listening, Tyler, why don't you explain the samurai chatter?
Well, the samurai chatter comes from the Sierra Sounds. It's this tape that, a guy by the name of Ron Moorhead, he was out hunting with some friends. It was like a group of them, and they were hearing this weird noise. And the tapes are fascinating. Woody and I actually got to hear them at the Bigfoot Museum here in Georgia, which is fascinating, which is also called Expedition Bigfoot. And there's like this whole section where they go into the Sierra tapes or the Sierra Sounds, and you get to listen on like headphones. And man, there is something unnerving about it. And I think,
oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, for me, the thing that makes it feel very real is it's such an abstract thought. There's such a high strangeness to just the idea of somebody like faking that and thinking, oh, well, if we're going to sort of hoax this like Bigfoot sound, like just the idea that a human would just come up with that and be like, oh, let's just throw in, samurai movies from the 60s and 70s. Let's just, some sort of Kurosawa samurai talk, and we'll just say that that's it. I think the high strangeness of that alone makes it entirely believable.
Yeah.
So it's kind of become a thing, and I don't think it's super widespread as far as like a ton of people hearing that same kind of thing, but you do see it like pop up in Bigfoot research, ever since it kind of Ron Moorhead kind of came out with it.
Something that I always think of is when you're out camping and just putting yourself there in that situation as Ron Moorhead, and I think his friend was out there too. If I heard that in the middle of the night, I would be terrified, man. It sounds crazy. That's one thought. The other piece that really interests me about the Sierra Sounds in general is just the thought about those creatures having some form of language, spoken language, and the fact that it sounds like Japanese is pretty stinking rad too.
Yeah.
So whenever I got to that portion of the story, man, I had full body chills. I thought, oh my gosh, man, that's what he heard. That's nuts. Yeah. And there's all kinds of Bigfoot stuff out in California, up and down that big old state. So, who knows? Maybe there was a Bigfoot, maybe it was Harry from the Harry and the Henderson. He's just coming to take a peek.
Nice.
See what's going on your street there, Dan.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, he is on that, Nevada, California. I mean, you're in the right area, Dan, for that, so.
Another time, same house, but we had a new baby brother introduced to the family. And now I'm in my senior year of high school, and I am now sharing a room with the next brother younger than me again, and I'm back in the bunk bed. My little brother and my baby brother are now sharing a room. And I am dreaming that I am in an alleyway and this demon is chasing me. It's like this dark, black, ethereal cloud. And I know it's a demon and it's trying to possess me. And then it latches onto me and starts kind of inching up my arm, kind of like Venom from Spider-Man. And I'm like freaking out because I can feel my arm like slowly going like pins and needles numb. And then I like jerk away from it and trying to rip my arm free, and I punch my wall and hurt my hand and wake up and realize that I have been sleeping on my arm. So not super supernatural, but man, that dream was freaky and super vivid.
So these kind of dreams are part of the reason that every now and then, depending on the time of year and stuff, I just have to like take a break from scary movies. I mean, I know that sounds potentially silly, but I tend to have very vivid, realistic dreams. And if I'm just kind of immersed in a genre at any point, then I tend to have those dreams and to, I don't know, it starts to intermingle into my typical sort of nice dreamscape that I like to, end the day with. So sometimes I got to take a break. And the idea of a demon coming after me, again, is far more scary to me than Freddy or Jason or Michael Myers or, any of that stuff.
Yeah, what's weird about that is I actually had a dream really similar to this. Years ago, I was staying with a friend of mine, my buddy Shad, our buddy Shad. I was staying with him overnight, and I had this dream that, which these are always sort of bizarre dreams in general, but I had this dream that I woke up, as I was staying at my buddy's house, which made it even more sort of realistic. So in the dream, I woke up, I walked into the bathroom, and for some reason I, flipped on the light, and I was just like looking in the mirror. And as I was looking in the mirror, it was like this same kind of thing, like that black symbiotic, venom type fluid, like came out of my mouth in the reflection. And
Ew.
and then was like pouring into my mouth, into my ears, into my eyes. And it's always been one of the most, I think about it actually fairly often, if I'm thinking about bad dreams, because it kind of did a number on me. And, it's one of those things where ever since I've thought like, was that like some weird, my, Carl Jung, like was that like my shadow self in the reflection kind of like taking over, in the real life or real world or whatever. Really terrifying. But yeah, that's interesting.
Man.
Yeah.
I don't even want to say, I don't want demons in my dreams. But I think we'll come back to this idea and this concept as we get further into, I guess this last story that he has, which, let's just press play.
The weirdest one that happened was, so I'm on the top bunk. It's a year or so later. I'm out of high school, and I'm working a job where I wake up pretty early. And my younger brother, at the time, this is right on the verge of everyone getting, Nokia cell phones. And we didn't have cell phones. We did have a wireless phone downstairs. But my brother had this habit of sneaking downstairs after my parents fell asleep to chat with his, girlfriends on the phone and use up my parents', minutes or whatever. So he would do that, and I would get pissed at him because he would always wake me up when he was entering and exiting the bed, shaking the bed and being inconsiderate and stuff while I'm trying to get sleep so I can go to work. So I wake up in the middle of the night, and I hear him coming up the stairs. And like I said earlier, there's one set of stairs that come upstairs. Only one. And this staircase, every other step, it's like a super, it feels like flimsy built staircase. Not unstable, but every single step like creaks as you walk up it. And if you're not stepping lightly, it will make like these unnecessarily loud creaks. And the walls of the house are pretty thin. It's a pretty old house. I can hear my brother, it sounds like he's stomping up the stairs. And I'm like, what the heck is he doing? Wake up mom and dad, wake up our baby brother. Why the heck is he stomping upstairs? And then the door knob starts to rattle. And I lean over the edge of my bed and I kind of whisper loudly, it's unlocked, you idiot. And my brother from the bottom bunk says, I'm in the bed already. And I'm like, oh man. And I'm like, goosebumps, my whole body goes cold. My brother flips on the light next to his nightstand, and we can both visibly see the doorknob shaking. And so I say one more time, it's unlocked. And then it just goes quiet. And I said to my brother, open the door. And so he gets up, rips open the door. There's nobody there. And what's insane is that every single door, the house settles at night, and so the door frames are kind of a little bit askew, I would imagine. And so when you open any door upstairs at night, there's a loud crack. The paint's a little too stuck to the door frame, and so it's kind of there's a crack when you open any door. And all the doors are closed. There wasn't anybody there. And there was no time for them to disappear, because my brother would have seen them, or we would have heard, the bathroom door or any of the other bedroom doors open. And there was no way they went down the stairs, because we were the first door at the top of the stairs. So he would have either, seen whoever it was going down the stairs, or, he would have at least heard them making all the noise that they made on the way up. For the rest of the night, we were up from that point until morning, and we just had the lights on, and we were just both like, what the heck was that? To this day, I think it was, my 2 cents is that, as I thought back and reflected back on that time, I know my dad was under just a lot of stress. There was a point where our lead pastor at church was dying. And so it just seemed like opposing spiritual forces were doing everything they could to my dad, because he was kind of the second in command, as it were. The associate pastor. And it just seemed like, as I think back on that time, it seemed like all these opposing spiritual forces were just harassing our house, doing whatever they could to just make my dad's life unnecessarily challenging for the road he had ahead of him. That's the only explanation I have, anyway, for those, at least 2 of those were definitely supernatural occurrences in my head, and the other 2 were maybe that I just have an extremely vivid imagination and was possibly experiencing, waking night terrors. But those are the stories I wanted to share, and thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoy those, and be curious if anybody else out there has heard samurai chatter that wasn't associated with a Bigfoot sighting. Thanks, guys.
We'll return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
So, Tyler, this one kind of reminded me, I want to say it was the very first Halloween special of ours, the Halloween Spectacular for season 1. It reminds me of your story.
Yeah, definitely. I immediately thought that too. So you can listen back to our first Halloween episode. Probably, well, other than like the orb story, I guess this is one of the more life-changing kind of, I guess, paranormal events that I've had in my life. But when I was a kid, I was staying at my dad's, long story short, I was staying at my dad's, and I was, woken up by this, with the sound of the like closet door, like, so the house that we were in was sort of plantation era, so it was really old, and it had these old like metal doorknobs that the only way I can describe it is like when it would turn, and you could really hear like it was almost like cast iron, so it was like you would hear the metal on metal kind of like kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's what woke me up, and that doorknob kind of turning, and then the door slowly opened, and which I didn't know at the time, but now in 2024 we kind of throw around the term like shadow man or whatever. WD-40, yeah.
Oh, my bad. Shadow man, yeah.
Kind of floated across the room and then just stood at my bed until I either, I don't know, passed out from shock or just fell asleep, which that's another thing we talked to Joshua Cushion about that's so common in these weird encounters where people are just like, yeah, I was doing this, and then I just fell back asleep, or I just, just went on with my day. It's almost like, kind of going back to that screen memory thing, it's almost like there's also this thing in your mind that sort of like resets, and you're like, okay, now you can continue on with normal life,
Man.
Yeah. But the doorknob part really kind of freaked me out. Also, and I question if I should even say this because, I don't know, I doubt my wife's ever going to listen to the show. But anyway, this is a little bit of an update to my recent sort of situation with the basement, and you can hear that story here.
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 4, Episode 6, Noises in the Basement, Poltergeists or Home Invaders.
But anyway, the other day, so after the episode and all the weird kind of stuff going on in my house, I went down to the basement and I set like the lawnmower, and I set up a bunch of stuff like in front of the door. So, nobody could get in and nobody could, mainly get out without having to, there's no way to like close the door behind you and put everything back against the door. And so, I kind of set some like traps or whatever. Anyway, all that to say, I went downstairs the other day. Nothing's happened. Everything's been totally fine. But I, for some reason, had like left the light on that morning, I think, which I totally, I believe that it was totally me that did this, because I went downstairs with the lawnmower battery and I realized it was dead, so I had to go back up and charge it. All that to say, I went down to the basement because I had to get something. I cut the light off, and I did have this weird sort of, when I say this, you're immediately going to know what I'm talking about, but that feeling that we all have had as kids where you're walking up the stairs and then suddenly you get this feeling like something's like behind you, and then you just full sprint up the stairs.
Oh, man, yeah.
Which is, such a common kind of thing as a kid, but I did...
less common as an adult, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely less common. And what's funny about it is I did feel kind of weird, but I like regulated, and I was like, nope. Like, I didn't say this all out loud, but I was in my mind, I'm like, nope, you're going to walk slowly up the stairs. This is your house. There's nothing to be afraid of. And so I walked up the stairs just as normal. I cut the light off, and just as I was going to close the door, back up to our ground level from the basement, just as I was right about to close the door, God, immediately I have cold chills. I hear like a bell ring. Man. And I don't know I have no idea what that could have been or anything that we would even have down there that would, could have possibly like fallen and like rang a bell. I mean, I don't know. It was really bizarre, and I have sort of no explanation for that.
That is so weird.
Yeah, it's weird. Definitely weird.
I mean, maybe do you think there was a fairy down there?
I mean, I
don't know.
I did kind of think of like, oh, well, maybe it's some, I don't know. I kind of thought that also, but then, the sort of fear side of my brain, immediately went to like the Harlequin type stuff too. So, which is like probably my biggest fear as far as, things that would scare you.
Man, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Just the idea of a heart. Ooh, I didn't even want to say the word out loud.
Yeah, me neither, dude. That's something that is the one thing that I don't like talking about like in the house.
Oddly enough, there was a Jeopardy question just like a week ago, and that was it was Final Jeopardy. It was the big bet, and that's what the question was. I think it was like Friday actually of last week.
Wow.
So anyway, interesting. But it was about Joker's girlfriend was the answer.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Okay. So many of these stories kind of revolve around that house that Dan moved to, and then the reason that he moved there was, I think maybe because his dad got that new job at a church and stuff. And so one of the theories there is like, were things trying to mess with him because of that,
Yeah.
And I've read about things like that, and we've kind of talked about stories where that could be a situation where, maybe somewhat nefarious, we won't call them evil even sometimes, but things that aren't necessarily good will kind of come after people that are, sort of heading in the positive, in the good direction.
Hey, you're doing the Lord's work out there.
Yeah.
They're trying to shut you down.
Just trying to shut you down.
Yep.
What's interesting, though, is he also later, Dan, also sent us an email, and he basically said, oh my gosh, sorry, I forgot to mention in the audio clip, and this is so interesting, that the town I grew up in, he says, is also one of the Zodiac killer sites.
Wow.
And has some local lore involved around Lake Herman, where the Zodiac murder happened. And the lore, in addition to the murder that took place before the Zodiac killer. And so he mentions a story about what the locals there call the Blue Lady or the Blue Baby. And he says, essentially, there's this myth or urban legend that a woman, for whatever reason, and this is pretty intense here, so little ears, now's a good time to maybe not listen, but it says, for whatever reason, drowned her infant at Lake Herman. And of course, her soul was cursed to haunt the lake. He says that he has a friend who swears that he saw her at night while driving around the lake on a dare at night. And then another friend swears that on the same road at night, he had to swerve off the road due to a sudden appearance of a baby carriage, and this was past midnight. But when he got out to look for the carriage, it had vanished. Man,
synchronicity. That kind of reminds me of
right
of your
it does
situation.
Same Halloween special, I believe. Same year.
Yep.
It kind of reminds me of the one big story that I have, which is just that was a heck of a date gone bad.
Yeah,
quick.
Yeah.
Hear Woody's terrifying real-life experience on That Would Be Rad, Season 1, Episode 10, The Halloween Spooktacular.
Man, that's crazy. Little interesting fact. I mean, I'm sure it has nothing to do with this, but I don't know, names of places has always been like interesting to me. But Lake Herman is sort of synchronistically reminded me of Mount Herman, which was in the Book of Enoch, where on Mount Herman is where the fallen angels fell, or the Watchers, and then that's pre-flood era. That's where they came down, and then would go on to create Nephilim and stuff. So I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting.
Paging Mr. Herman.
Mr. Herman.
I'm going to take another quick break, but when we get listener stories, we also kind of try to dive into the area that they mention in terms of, their geographical location to see if there's anything else either that we've talked about before or that we haven't yet that kind of is in that area. And I happened upon something that caught my eye immediately, and it sounds crazy and scary, but I found something and I reached back out to Dan, and when I mentioned it, he said, I actually haven't heard of that before. So when we get back from the break, we've got something to dive into that's just insane.
Awesome.
We will return after these messages.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures
from another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
This is Joshua Cutchin, and you're at my home for weirdness. That would be rad.
All right, so apparently kind of in that sort of California Bay Area, and we're up near like Northern California, near specifically now closer to San Jose. And apparently there's this really sort of infamous road, and it's called Hicks Road. Now, hold on a second there, California. What are you trying to say here? Is that what happens? They just I don't know, there's some crazy stuff down there. Name it Hicks Road.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, anyway. All these different urban legends that sort of surround this area. Winding through the Almaden Quicksilver Mines is Hicks Road, which is a locally known road that apparently has been rumored to be inhabited by everything from satanic cults, cannibals, even blood-sucking beings. In 2009, someone named Julian Flores was a director of a 2009 short film called Hicks Road, and also an author of Hicks Road, Jacob's Story. Now, I haven't looked into what that book's about, but I did look to see that the movie is about that urban legend, and it's just like a short film, so I couldn't find it right away. But anyhow, let me dive in a little bit more into some of this information, because really there's this, what people also refer to as the Hicks Road colony. So apparently, people that drive on Hicks Road have been attacked. And because of that, drivers have sort of just steered clear, no pun intended. In these sort of horror stories that appear online and just, shared over the years, there's this colony of strange and vicious individuals who are sort of lurking in the darkness and will literally go after anybody if they get too close. Rumors about the colony at Hicks Road have persisted over the years. And, as per usual, any of these sort of urban legends, let's just throw whether or not they've been confirmed with fact or not out the, who cares, okay? Right. So the colony's origins apparently stem from this other creepy local lore. There are several theories about how this clan has kind of come to live near Hicks Road. The legend itself has been around since the 1970s, maybe even earlier than that. And so one of these suggestions, because apparently not only is this just like a creepy colony of people that live in the woods, but the main thing is that they're these albino, potentially cannibalistic colony.
Wow.
All right. And so when kind of trying to trace the origins, a lot of people have different theories and stuff. And one of them is maybe it's that they were related to this Swedish community that is based at the entrance of the Uvas Canyon Park. They're not albino, but they are fair-skinned. Others say it began when the United Technologies Corporation located kind of close off of Metcalf Road, which is a scientific research facility where technology is tested. The kind of place that would, of course, ignite rumors of genetic mutations. Some also said that maybe it's a religious cult-like community that's even possibly satanic. There's one actually close to there called the Holy City in nearby Santa Cruz, which I think we talked about a little bit on an episode before, slightly. Either that or You and I have talked about it off the show. So here's the legend. Supposedly, the clan does not like, and they are not too friendly to outsiders. Legend has it that they will even chase people out. So some accounts, people are just driving by, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these cannibals will just run down the road chasing the vehicles just on foot, until you just get the heck out of Dodge. Sometimes even sort of like trying to run the people off the road or jumping on like the car itself. So there's this story that I found, and it's a personal account by somebody, and he's talking about it because one of his friends, who's also named Dan, talks about his personal account. And so whenever I saw that, I was like, I need to reach out to Dan and just make sure.
You're like, is this
him.
Dan? Is this his
exactly.
story? Wow. But I guess you found out that there's actually more than one Dan in the area.
It turns out there's more than one Dan in California. Okay. And so here's what this account says. It says, growing up in the Bay Area, you will undoubtedly hear stories of a long, lonely, and windy road in the southern area of San Jose, known as Hicks Road. The rumors and the stories you hear, I can assure you, are quite true indeed. An albino family living back in the hillside of Hicks Road in a dilapidated old house. Once I was told by a close friend named Dan about his personal encounter with these albinos. Dan's story will take us back to the autumn of 2007, late August to be specific. Dan and some of his buddies were out on a Thursday night, cruising for some excitement. One of the backseat drivers had an idea.
No, backseat drivers?
No. Yeah. You know, people that are like trying to give you direction.
Oh, okay, start
from the
over,
backseat.
sorry.
No. I'm going to keep that in and show people that sometimes, even when you correct me, I'm still right. Mm-hmm. I will take it over again, though. One of the backseat drivers had an idea, which he proposed to the group, to drive down Hicks Road and search for the elusive albinos. Seeing as Dan was the driver, he was initially skeptical about the idea, but peer pressure broke him down, and with the destination set, their course commenced. The winding roads nestled behind in the woodsy hills was a tedious drive for Dan as his nerves began kicking in. There are not really albinos out there, is what he kept reminding himself. Without warning, Dan's car collided with something. A large, dark figure in what blurred before Dan's eyes as he slammed on the brakes. When the car came to a rest, the headlights revealed a large buck sprawled across the street, clearly not moving. As all of the occupants of the car realized what had happened, another dark figure appeared from the roadside. Except this figure split into 3 separate entities. Moving quickly into the road, the headlights now showed 3 humans with pasty white skin and blood-shocked eyes. Working with haste, the 3 albinos dragged the bloodied buck down the hillside and out of sight. After a moment of shock and terror, Dan sped off back home, showing everyone he could the damage the buck left on his car and trying to explain how 3 albinos came to the corpse was a bit far-fetched. Yet, Dan and his 3 friends all swear by their story.
Wow.
Supposedly, they don't just do that. Now, when I read that initially, I kind of thought, well, did it just happen to be a coincidence that a deer jumped in front of Dan's car and, these albinos just kind of pop out of the woods? Or did they set up a trap?
Right.
And see, this is where my mind was whenever I was going down the mountain road, and all of a sudden there's first there's people chasing me, and then after that there was a fire truck in the middle of the road with no other wreckage anywhere.
Yeah, you do hear those stories where, it's like an operation. You have, what is it called? You have like basically you have like your distraction, and then, or you're the linchpin for you, like speeding away. Right. And then, you have a group set up like further down the road who,
you're setting up kind of like an ambush.
Right, ambush, yeah.
So another thing that's kind of freaky is, according to other personal accounts, they'll even sometimes have like improvised weapons, even guns sometimes. And although there aren't any accounts of them actually like taking a life, but of course, maybe, there's a lot of missing people up there.
Right,
who knows?
Right.
Yeah. Of course, the rumor about it being a satanic cult kind of was widespread, claiming that visitors to the road can call upon the cult for revenge on enemies even. According to these tales, a bridge near Hicks Road has been cursed by the cult. Those who write a person's name on the bridge will be granted the demise of that person.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, that's pretty creepy. This whole thing kind of, originally my first thought when I heard this was, and I don't think maybe we've touched on it on the show, but we probably do need to do an official episode on it, because it's one of the most sort of widely known urban legends, I would say. And it takes place in, I know, Michigan, but I think several other places, maybe Ohio also. But it's like the melon heads. You remember those characters?
Yep.
Where, and they're kind of known for, being these sort of short, albino, big heads. A lot of people kind of propose that it's some sort of like hydrocephalus type thing going on. But then as you continued, it made me think of, and here's another topic that we've never really talked about, the moon-eyed people. Do you remember this? This is something that's in our very own backyard here in North Georgia, and it's this, it's in a ton of documents, years and years old, but it's this story of these, they were sort of looked at as like just another sort of Indian tribe or another group of natives of the area, but they were all albino. They had really horrible vision and wouldn't come out in the day, and they sort of lived at night. And, you can find it in all kinds of like Cherokee oral traditions and that kind of thing. And, they were known for being short, albino, and they only came out at night. So I think that's really interesting. Thirdly, though, when you were talking about the one sort of splitting into three. So there's a podcast called Monsters Among Us. It's been around forever. And it's all pretty much listener stories, really. And it's been on for years. But one of the things that the host, I can't remember his name, but I think it's pretty cool, and it's kind of invaluable, really. It's sort of like anything with like an aggregate sort of slant, sort of like MUFON or something like that. It's like collecting a ton of data, so you're going to start to see things like jump out as like, oh, well, there's a lot of different listeners who are seeing this one thing or this thing. And one of the things with that show that he sort of stumbled across is, I think he calls them the mirrored men. And it's this, I don't know if you would call it like a cryptid, or there's definitely something like paranormal to it, but it's these people that claim, it's been like hikers or, tourists visiting like national parks, but usually it takes place like out in the woods. A lot of hunters would see it, while they're hunting, and they would run across, I think the lowest number would be like 2, and I've heard maybe up to like 4, these sort of characters, and a lot of times they're dressed kind of weird to be like out in the woods, sometimes like a Men in Black type thing. But it's these men that all share like these same movements. And one of the things too is, say a person kind of like glances over and they see one, and then they turn, and then they're like, oh, what was that? And they look back, and then there's 3 or 2 or whatever. So, I don't know if there's any kind of anything to do with that, but I find that interesting though.
Well, big time, man. Here's some of the other things about it. So, like, on the cannibalistic side of things, people started noticing, and this kind of reminds me, I think you'll pick up on this quickly. Initially, stories depict them carrying off deer, sometimes even trying to bite into humans, and even sometimes going after family pets. One alleged encounter included somebody or like one of the colony members carrying off a poodle in the night. Bones of dogs have been found in the area, you know, and they, of course, tie that also to like the Satanism stuff. To me, right there a little bit, including this next one, it kind of reminds me of potential Bigfoot or, you know, those kind of stories about like Bigfoot in the woods coming down to farms, kind of terrorizing. I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit of
Skinwalker.
Yeah, Skinwalker Ranch.
Yep. Although I will say before you get into this, something about there are, satanic cults and stuff, like, I don't know. Maybe it's like the time period, but there is that like satanic panic thing that's like, oh, this thing's bad or this thing happened. It's like, oh, it must be that group, that satanic cult up in the mountains, you know?
Here's another thing that's going to kind of freak you out if you're thinking about ever driving down this road. Some people report like seeing like these red eyes looking at them from the wood line, glowing in the dark. Wow. Other people have talked about how even though you might not get attacked, you can sometimes hear them screaming out in these terrifying, unearthly tones that just echo across this darkness.
Wow.
And again, that kind of reminds me of, of course, the sort of skeptics and the debunkers will just be like, barn owls, coyotes, that kind of thing, which I get for sure. Those are terrifying sounds in the middle of the night as well. But, I mean, no matter what, that's freaky. Some people have, another theory, of course, is some people believe that they're ghosts, echoes from some former sort of territorial band of indigenous tribes, stuff like that. It's interesting to note that they were, in fact, the inspiration again for that horror film.
Yeah.
And so like the premise of that film, it says the urban legend of Hicks Road has captured the minds and thoughts of many residents in San Jose, California, and especially the imagination of 4 college students that grew up, of course, they grew up hearing the story again and again. These 4 curiosity seekers attempt to find out what is really going on in the shadows of Hicks Road. But little do they know that what lies ahead will haunt and change them for the rest of their lives. Yeah. I mean,
wow.
There's a bunch of other sort of like, maybe it's the homeless population in the area, the lore kind of places them all over the place. There's some mines. There's also nearby Mount Umunhum, and some of the stories kind of circle around that. So it's like, when a local urban legend begins to get so big, the geography kind of expands a little bit.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of the weird things that go bump in the night can then be explained by that, Yeah. But regardless, the idea of this sort of cannibalistic albino colony that's just living out in the woods.
Yeah.
Is just terrifying, man.
Yeah. If we're taking all this at face value, I think if nothing else, it's at least like some group of people, that just kind of want to be left alone, maybe off the grid or whatever. And it's sort of like scare tactics, or maybe it is.
Yeah, good point.
Something kind of like the Hellier show where, you start getting into like hollow earth, like, because you said there's like cave systems and stuff, and like you get into like the goblin motif. So I don't know, who knows? It could be, and you think like, well, cave dwellers, like the, similar to like the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins.
Yeah,
and if there are cave systems, something living in a cave obviously isn't going to get a lot of sunlight. And they would be pale, which would lead you to thinking they were albino. So, I don't know. Who knows? I think it's fascinating.
It is, man. And it kind of reminds me of there's so many movies and stuff and stories that kind of revolve around that idea. The Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Even Texas Chainsaw Massacre, any kind of, story that begins with like this deranged family, people who are just kind of passing through, is just so scary to me, man.
Yeah, it is creepy. And the like the deer thing.
Yeah.
That's like, I don't know, there's something super kind of like primitive or like primal about that.
Right.
It's scary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that primal strength it would take to throw a deer across the road.
Yeah.
and simplistic in nature in terms of like the actual mechanics of the trap. It's pretty simple. It's just, we've seen cars, these moving, like I'm putting myself in the mind of this person. I've seen these cars stop and try to avoid hitting this deer.
Right.
What happens if we put one in the way? Oh, they'll stop and then we can get them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah.
It's terrifying, man.
Yeah.
But, that was a fun find in, it kind of an foot clamped. That was a fun find after just kind of exploring this side of the U.S. and Dan's town, or kind of close to where he's at in California. And just these, like, I thought you were going to say it earlier, I don't think you did, but you kind of alluded to it. For some reason, every single time we have all these seemingly unrelated stories, right? You've got Clay's dream about alien grays. You've even got his, Philip K. Dick idea and thought process when he's thinking of like the hologram overlaid on top of real life. And then you've got, strange dreams that have demons in them, and like the Sierra sounds. And then now these albino cannibals living in the woods. In a way, it's like, and I hate to do it, but I feel like there sometimes can be connective tissue between all of those in some way.
Yep. I totally agree. I mean, the beginning of this episode, I'm thinking, is this going to be too kind of like broad? But I feel like they're, all these sort of different topics are at least adjacent to each other in different ways,
Right.
So, I really enjoyed it. And thanks again, guys. Thanks, Clay. Thanks, Dan. We really appreciate these episodes where, instead of us just kind of presenting things that we're interested in or these, sort of topics that we sort of present to you guys, it's always really cool when you guys come to us with things like this. I mean, especially with this particular episode, I mean, we never would have found out about these, these albino goblins or whatever they are. We would have never known about that because it does seem to be like a pretty localized type urban legend, which are our favorites.
Right. And when you look it up, it's like everybody from that area is like, oh yeah, man. Like if you just start to take a dive on this topic on Reddit, for example, everybody and their brother has seen them. They've.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, man. My brother was driving down that road, and so like that type of stuff that on our East Coast end of the world, never even in a million years on my radar.
Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah.
And
without the internet, like we would never ever hear about this.
Yeah, or it would take a lot longer.
Yeah, sure.
But yes, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Clay. And another thing that's relatively common when we get listener stories and stuff, and I think part of the importance of it is a lot of times it will kind of be wrapped up and end with like, has anybody else ever experienced something like that? So their interest, the people that are submitting these stories, but then also our interest is there anyone out there listening to this show today or right now that has something similar?
Yeah.
Were you able to, like have this realization almost like Dan did whenever he heard the Sierra sounds again several years later? If you have something like that you want to share or that you don't really want to necessarily go public with it, always feel free to let us know when you send us stories. And Tyler's about to tell you how to do that. But when you do send those to us, just, make it clear when you send it, hey, look, don't share my name. And we've done that before on the show. Don't share my name or where I'm from, but here's this crazy story.
Yeah.
Happy to kind of get it out there so that if there are other people that have heard about that or experienced that, then again, it kind of brings us all together and unites us as a rad strangeness community.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you would like to participate in that community, head on over to our Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Leave us a comment. Tell us about your own story. Drop us a DM if it's a little more long form. If you like writing essays, shoot that to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. And like Woody was saying about leaving in your own voice, which is, something that's just, it's totally rad. And we really love that. You can do that on the website, thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can pretty much just leave your own little voice memo. And like in this episode, we can put it to some cool sound design and make it spooky and make it cool. If you're not getting enough, That Would Be Rad, head on over to our Patreon, The Rabbit Trail, where there's more of what you love, and it really goes a long way in supporting us and helping us. And we have a great big summer lined up with some really, really great topics and really cool stuff. So, stick with us. I guess that's about it. What do you got? Anything else?
I think that's it, man.
Right on, dude. Well, we love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would